So welcome everybody to what is the first Women in Telecoms and Technology meeting for 2022. As we were chatting, we had thought we might do this one as a real in-person event, but Omicron, I'm afraid, has pushed us back into the virtual world, which I suppose is okay, given that we're going to be talking about the metaverse. So we decided the back end of last year that it would be an interesting subject to introduce this year. It's one of those subjects that when you start reading about it, you suddenly realize there's just a huge number of strands to it. And for that reason, we have, I think, a panel that's going to talk about quite a number of different aspects of what eventually will become the metaverse. And I'm going to now, I think, just rather than trying to explain what the metaverse is, leave it to the speakers to tell you a bit about what they think it is. I think that's going to be very, very much more interesting. So we have 4 really fantastic speakers, and I'm going to ask them to speak in this order. So I'll just introduce them briefly in this order. So Emily Savage, who was until very recently the immersive commercial lead at the Digital Catapult. She's now just moved on to a new post, a new role with what sounds like a really interesting startup. She's going to tell us quite a lot about immersive technologies and the way that they are developing and how they affect what we think might be the metaverse. We're then going to ask Teresa and Ngone to speak. Teresa is a consultant and journalist currently living in Paris. We have a very international panel tonight, which is excellent. And I suppose one of the other advantages of being virtual as opposed to in London altogether. And she has just written an article, a book about NFT trends in 2022, and she's going to be talking to us about NFTs and why we should all be rushing out there and buying them, and what they mean, and why you might want an NFT of a Caravaggio, for example. We're then going to pass on to Genevieve Leveille, and Genevieve is actually in the Dominican Republic at the moment. So we thank her very much for coming in from there. And Genevieve is going to tell us quite a lot about blockchain, as she's been involved with blockchain applications in agriculture and in other areas. And she's going to explain a little bit about the basics of blockchain and then some of the applications and cases. And that leaves us to last, but by no means least, Gina Felce, who is the ops director at Talewind, which is a games company. And she's going to tell us the fun bit about games, what games are all about, and why they're actually the driving force behind the metaverse. It's not Facebook at all, Meta, who cares about that? So I'm going to pass over to Emily to tell us a little bit about the immersive side of life, immersive technologies. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Let me just get on with sharing screen here and make sure this works. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes, that's fine. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, and you're not getting, I know sometimes it blocks out part of the slide where I've got your faces, but are you able to see the whole screen? Brilliant. Okay, well, yes, thank you ever so much, Annette. Thank you, Audrey, as well for both organising this event and inviting myself to speak. As mentioned, I am actually on my way out from Digital Catapult, but I have a week left. And then we'll be starting with a new company called Ultraleap here in Bristol. So I will just tell you all a little bit more about Digital Catapult as well. But my role for the last 3 years has very much been heading up the immersive strategy from the commercial product point of view. And therefore, I've kind of learned a huge amount about immersive, virtual reality, augmented reality, where I wanted to thread a few different parts of it together to try and start lining what we mean by the metaverse. So first of all, I'll just tell you a couple of bits and bobs about Digital Catapult, because we are basically the UK authority on advanced digital tech. And that means that we work with startups, we work with industry, we work with government and academia, really to help them further develop their innovation and adoption of advanced digital technology. So there's about 160 of us. We're mainly based in London, but then have a few outposts here in Bristol, up in the north of the UK, and in Belfast. And ultimately, we focus on the 4 areas that you can see on that slide. So 5G, Internet of Things, immersive tech, where I am, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Oh, there we go. What really makes us what we are is really the people and the experts that we have, as well as our facilities. So we have expert technologists, many of them are PhD doctors from academia across all of those technologies. We then have a design and innovation practitioners. We have this huge array of tech startups because we run lots and lots of accelerator programs and incubator programs as well. And then equally, we work with industry to build proof of concepts to help them de-risk and understand how could they adopt these technologies, what do they mean to their business, and how do they start to really get involved with their actual business process. And then we have a number of high-tech facilities like 5G testbeds, immersive labs, etc. So absolutely do still get in touch with me about Digital Catapult if you've got more questions on it, and I can direct you to the right people. But today I want to talk a little bit more about immersive. Immersive is really the term that's used to define a collective bunch of technologies that also get called XR, and they involve virtual reality, augmented reality, and a whole bunch of other things that we'll talk about in a little bit. But really at the heart of what are immersive technologies and why are they special? Well, it boils down to exactly what you think from that word. You know, that if you look at the definition of immersive, it is that ability to seemingly surround the audience and players so they feel completely involved in something. And this all boils down to the fact that immersive technologies are able to provide you with a sense of presence. They allow the user to feel part of something that maybe didn't feel normal or natural, or something that they could easily imagine. And yet through these technologies, they're able to have their imagination and therefore their empathy further drawn into. So let's go back right to basics. When we're talking about this sense of presence, what is it as human beings that we need to create this sense of presence? And there's a whole bunch of different theories on this, but this is Kent Bai, who's a big knowledge base in the VR world, and the way that he breaks it down. And really, you need these 4 different things. You need the active presence, so the ability to be physically active in a space. You need to be able to interact with others to give you that social presence. You need emotional presence, and this is a lot harder to really provide someone, but it is that ability to have natural reactions, responses to events that occur in a natural way. And then embodied presence, which really is that idea that you are yourself there. Sorry, let me just go back on that. That might be impossible. There we go. So that often is defined by movement through space and the ability to see your limbs while you're in that space. But I think the best way for all of us to work out digital environments that give us a sense of presence and those that don't is, of course, to think about the pandemic. Really, over the last 2 years, we have all been doing a huge amount of interacting through things like Zoom. And I think it's fair to say that most of us do not feel 100% present in Zoom. And when you look at this little quadrant, it's really clear to see why. It's because it's very, very hard to have the emotional presence, to have that embodied presence, other than the fact I can just see my own picture coming back. And really, therefore, we only get the social presence to some degree. However, immersive technologies do allow for all of these things to be achieved. So I'll scale back slightly and say, what do we actually mean by immersive technologies? Well, as I say, it's a category umbrella, and it includes a whole bunch of different things. And these are some of the examples. Virtual reality is, of course, when you're putting on a headset, you're putting something over your eyes, often over your ears, that is taking you entirely into a different virtual world. You are no longer in the present world. Augmented reality and mixed reality are somewhat of a halfway house between that. So often you'll either be wearing glasses or you might be using your phone, and that allows you to have an augmented layer of information, additional information that maybe in its most basic terms just is there in your social surrounding, in the real surrounding, or in more advanced terms, it's actually interacting. It's able to interact with the chair that's in your room and interact with the different people who are also opening up an augmented experience. Haptics, well, this is where my new job's going to be taking me, but haptics is all about this idea of being able to give us sensors, give us feedback whilst we're in a virtual environment. So that little picture there is of a haptic glove. When you're wearing it, you actually are able to have the sensation of touch whilst you're in a virtual environment. And then, of course, often forgotten, but incredibly important, is the audio element of all of this, using binaural, using spatial audio to really make us feel present in that 3D spatial environment that's brought to life through Immersive. So all of these different elements, when combined with the sorts of software and games engines that can actually create these content experiences, they then end up making this huge range of different applications. So here we can see a few different examples, but really all of them are very much a result of creating that sense of presence. And by having that sense of presence, virtual reality and augmented reality have revolutionized training. You can see here an example of a firefighter being trained through virtual reality. They've dramatically reduced design processes. And there's an example on the top left of someone being able to visualize an engine to tweak it before it goes anywhere near actually being produced in the construction process. They've also allowed incredible charity campaigns. There's some absolutely wonderful examples of virtual reality and 360 videos being used to create such dramatic empathy that the donations have been absolutely off the scale, and the connection that donors have formed have been unique. And then, of course, there's also just a lot of gaming and people falling around on the floor because they are so present, they are so in the moment that they do not realize that they're actually not going over a ski jump in real life. So this brings us to the metaverse. Where does all of this immersive technology now take us onto with this big new buzzword, the metaverse? Well, first of all, let's start with the definition. I think we'll get lots of different versions of this as we go through the evening as well. And by no means am I a metaverse expert. I think we've got a whole bunch of other brilliant people that will go into more detail. But this is a well-known expert in the area who talks about the metaverse being an expansive network of persistent, real-time rendered 3D worlds that support continuity of identity, objects, history, payments, and entitlements, and can be experienced synchronously by effectively unlimited numbers of users, each with an individual sense of presence. So this is where the sense of presence really comes to life again. But it's this idea that we are in a different world that we have presence in, and there's multiple other people there. Now, I think the really important thing to say is that the metaverse is not new. And I think lots of people are starting to realize this. Of course, it's blown up recently because of Facebook, or Meta, really starting to blow its trumpet. But as many of you will know, it was really coined by Neil Stephenson in his 1992 book, Snow Crash. And then it was reimagined again as the Oasis in the novel Ready Player One in 2011. And equally, along this whole journey between kind of 92 and now, we've seen various different kind of illustrations of what the metaverse can be. Probably, you know, one of the most famous early examples was Second Life. Kind of, it was the new age Sims, for those of you who remember, and you're able to, you know, users were able to create their environment and live it in a 2D form. We then have Microsoft's Altspace. It's now Microsoft, but again, that's been around now for a number of years. I think you could arguably say that Epic Games were some of the one of the companies to really coin the phrase the metaverse in recent times, with Fortnite being, you know, one of the highest revenue games in all time, and not because the money that you pay up front, but rather the money that people pay to create their lives and buy objects in the game itself. And then, of course, we've got Meta's Horizon Worlds as the most recent example of the metaverse. Now, as I say, this is just the beginning, and there's still a really long way to go. At Digital Catapult, the way that we've started to look at this, and many other people have started to look at this, is that really to get to the metaverse, it's not just about the content, it's about some very, very large areas of technology starting to collide. So you've got this idea of the next generation content and how it's produced and what it looks like and what the user experience is. But then alongside that, you've got the infrastructure and the interoperable platforms that are going to be needed to power this. And this is, of course, why we've seen so many tech giants charging in, from the likes of Facebook through to NVIDIA, through to Microsoft. And then based on all of that, and I think we're going to hear a lot more about this tonight, are the new business models, the behavior changes, the use of NFTs, the use of all of these new currencies and blockchain-based currencies as well, to drive these patterns of building our lives in this digital space, if that even becomes the end reality of all of this. But basically, there is complex convergence of technologies and, of course, a huge amount of social change that's going to need to happen. So I'm going to just wrap up really in the next minute or so by just pointing out some of the areas of interest for Digital Catapult. As I say, we are effectively an R&D organization, and we work on both grant-funded R&D projects as well as industry-funded R&D and innovation. And for us, these are really the three areas that we are continuing to build our expertise around for the metaverse. So firstly, that kind of XR or immersive user experience, audience journey. We've done large amounts of work on this already for government and industry in and around immersive. So what does it mean to have a safe, to have a consistent experience within immersive, and equally, how is that going to expand into the metaverse? Secondly, is the actual idea of how do we make this content? And there are huge, huge developments happening in film and TV at the moment under the kind of category of virtual production. And it includes all sorts. This little GIF here is showing motion capture, but equally there's all sorts of using LED screens and virtually tracked cameras in TV studios and film studios to create new types of content. All of that kind of content is going to be very valid in the metaverse and 3D spatial worlds that continue to persist. And then, of course, there's the role of 5G. This is a real strength of Digital Catapults. We have a number of 5G technologists, and we've already explored an awful lot as to what 5G means for hybrid events, such as hybrid music concerts. How can you create worlds where people can come together and perform despite being remote? And that leads us on to working with new partners. And one of our new partners at the moment is Niantic, the people that created Pokemon Go, and really starting to explore what does it mean to develop real world metaverse experiences, i.e. augmented reality experiences that we take with us in the real world. So I will wrap it up there because I know I could talk forever, and there's loads of other very exciting speakers. But thank you ever so much. Feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, and also thanks ever so much for having me.
Wow, Emily, that was a really good tour de force. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass swiftly on because time is of the essence today, as we've got 4 fantastic speakers. I want to give everybody a chance and come back to questions at the end. So I want to pass on to Teresa, who's going to tell us about NFTs, which, Emily, you hardly mentioned, but I think they're in that behavioural piece. So let's have a look at those and see what Teresa's got to say about that. Thank you, Teresa. Over to you.
Thank you, Annette and Audrey, for inviting me to come and talk a bit about NFTs. I'm just going to give a bit of a high level about NFTs, what is going on at the moment, and how it all links to the metaverse. I think just to start with, all of us as human beings can connect to the idea of ownership. It's as deep-rooted as survival to the superficial around ownership of perhaps beauty products, books, property, art, cars. It's something that at the end of the day reflects our personal culture and our personal identity. Now, when it comes to non-fungible tokens, the word doesn't exactly roll off your tongue, and it does confuse a lot of people. But really, at a very simple level, if something is fungible, it just means that it can be easily replaced. And if something is non-fungible, it just means that it's unique. So if I was to give you a £20 note and I said, can I have it back? I wouldn't be looking at the serial numbers to be like, is this exactly the same £20 note I gave you? £20 is £20. But if I had another £20 note and it had been signed by Prince Charles and I gave that to you, and then you gave me back just an ordinary £20 note, it wouldn't be the same. That other £20 note would actually be unique. So how does something which is unique, why does that lead to all this hype that we're seeing when it comes to collections such as the Bored Ape Yacht Club? Well, when we look at NFTs, at the end of the day, they are digital certificates that just represent ownership for a unique item. Okay, so what we're looking at here on the left-hand side is a piece of art by Damien Hirst. It's called The Currency. That's his NFT. And on the right, we're looking at the underlying smart contract. And the smart contract tells anyone who's able to read it, it says that this NFT belongs to a particular individual or group of individuals. And they cannot be modified or they cannot be tampered with. But what is happening on a macro level is that NFTs have become popular because they represent and tokenize all fringes of culture, be that food, gaming, art, collectibles. It allows people to come together and form these micro communities around shared interests. And each of these NFTs represent entry into these communities. Now, obviously, we know about the numbers that we hear about in the headlines. And why do you have these numbers? Because there are scarcities to this collection that have been programmatically put in, that there can only be 10,000 of these specific, for example, Damien Hirst, The Currency, there can only be 10,000. So if more than 10,000 people want it and the collection is extremely popular, there is speculation and investment activity that happens behind it, which can lead to, in some cases, quite high values. But the idea of NFTs really came around last year because of COVID. It was the perfect confluence of having too much time at home, spending more time online, and us as human beings just wanting to have a connection. And this is why they skyrocketed, to the point where, even though they started as just an idea, can we put pictures onto the blockchain? But then what happened was that people became very passionate about these ideas and this community, and they formed together to the point where there were $1 million reoccurring revenues happened. And this is what has caught the eye of VCs as they look to see which one of these projects can actually be a bona fide unicorn in the future. If we look at someone like Micah Johnson, you might not have heard of him now, but you might do in the future. He's a former Major League Baseball player turned artist, and he's been already acknowledged by Christie's. He's a formidable artist. He does wonderful work. And what he wants to do is he wants to take the character of Aku, this little boy with the astronaut hat, and he wants to make him the next Buzz Lightyear, the next Mickey Mouse. And he wants to build the IP for Pixar, his own Pixar. Now, originally, Micah might have had to gone to angel investors and said, please believe in my vision. Can I raise money so I can go and do this? But he didn't have to. As a talented artist, he could use NFTs as a way to raise money. People buy his art, and in return, he takes his collectors on a journey, the journey of building Aku into the next Pixar. If you're a collector, you love Micah because he's actually a very nice person. You can see him in interviews online. He's a very nice gentleman, and you get one-to-one access to him. And for Micah, he loves having direct access to his community because he gets ideas. They tell him how they tell him, how can we make Aku better? How can we get to Pixar? How can everybody be rewarded in this journey? Imagine if you were able to spot the next Tracy Emin when she was 18, or the next Coldplay when they were just starting out, and you collected their work and you followed that journey until they became the idea of Tracy Emin that you know today, or Coldplay today. It's a very symbiotic relationship. It's very positive when it's done right. And if there's digital scarcity behind it, this is how you get these astronomical values that we're seeing today. Now, when it comes to NFTs in the metaverse, it will be about projecting who we are in the same way that we do right now, whether it's across a tattoo, the way we dress, how many LinkedIn connections we have, or a very sort of specific haircut. It's about who you are and the message you want to signal to the world. And that will continue in NFTs. You'll be able to look at a collection and say, okay, this person cares about gastronomy, fine art, being part of communities that maybe a celebrity is in. But when we go deeper, what really NFTs is about, it's about digital ownership. And digital ownership is a very new idea in that it hasn't had an equal importance as to in real life ownership. But there's a gap there and it's going to get filled. And what will happen is that as we start to understand that digital ownership is as important as in real life ownership, because there's upside to the economic participation and the positive network effects, individuals will have to take a choice, either to be left behind or to participate in what we know as the Web3 economy. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave it there. If anyone has any questions, again, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm there.
Wow. I'm still not quite sure I want to go and buy an NFT, but I'm beginning to get the picture, if you see what I mean. That was, again, really interesting and a very important part of what we're seeing so frequently today in the papers. Underpinning that, of course, is blockchain. And I think that's a very good segue into Genevieve's talk, which is going to be a little bit more about how blockchain works, what it is, and the sorts of things that can be used for, including, of course, NFTs. So over to you, Genevieve. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to talk to you about blockchain. And I don't know how many of you are involved in that, but in reality, for me, blockchain is a database. Think of it like a spreadsheet, special one, which you can't change information and it's unhackable. Now, when we look at the idea of distribution and cloud databases, you have, is it centralized? And this is really, we're hearing a new term called the Web 3.0. And there was a very interesting article a few weeks ago around this concept, which is what exactly is Web 3.0? It's really us thinking from Web 1.0, where everyone thought they would have their own databases. Then we went to Web 2, where you had people such as Microsoft Azure, the AWS, really providing the ability for companies to host their own environment. And now we're looking at this idea where people are now having that P2P interaction, which means records cannot be modified and it's not tracked. And really, this is moving from what would be a distribution to this idea of traceability. Now, I'm not going to bore you too long. If we look at this idea of blockchain, it's really a unique block, which is generated based on data, and then you can create new information about it or additional information, but nothing's changed. And this can be taken down to being a blockchain, which is decentralized. So all the blocks are getting written. And if the information with the exchange is validated, then it allows it to keep going forward. Now, obviously, this is very highly complicated technology that I hire teams to do, but hopefully can understand. Now, what happened is that this idea of immutability is really, the first block was generated on data. When you have a new block, it looks at the previous block and allows it to be able to come in and also know who's the owner, the value, and then what should be the next one to come. Now, this keeps going on. And if for some reason something happens where it is not validated, then you're not able to bring it further in. So which is why this whole idea of nodes. And this is where it gets very interesting in terms of the Web 3.0. Now I can actually collaborate with others and have them be able to verify the information as I verify it. This is still in a machine to machine, but if we now think about it where it's pushing, it's where as individual we'll be able to do that. And that is something I'm looking forward to hear how it's done in the game, which is obviously I'm buying a gun in my game. How do I make sure that it's really the gun and this gun is for real and I will be getting it? So now the first really what I would call the killer application was cryptocurrency, and to name the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. And I like to think that it was a woman because it is really about sharing. It is really about using cryptography to track of who owns and also having secure transaction. Many think that it was as a result of 2008, but I actually think that it was happening way before, and it just became much more relevant as we were having this financial crisis. Now, I'm not going to go very much about the non-fungible token because Teresa did such a great job explaining it. But if you now have an asset and you can put it onto the blockchain, so imagine you can then digitize, or what I like to say, do the digital twin of that asset, if that asset actually exists in real form, and then allow for the transfer from people to people. Now, because of this idea of non-fungible token, which means it can't change to be anything, I think what it's done is fired the imagination. But in reality, the great idea is to also allow to tokenize a product, which allows you to then add additional data, such as ownership, storage, price, who's the farmer, what distance did it travel. And this is something that is really around the transparency of using digital ledger technology in the farming. So we have remote sensing, genetic tailoring, food production information. And if we can capture this in a way that can be trusted, it will result in better global food security and sustainability. And food security is this idea that there isn't enough for everyone to eat. And unfortunately, the last couple of years has shown us that it's not about the production that's happening, but it is getting it to the right people. Now, transparency is really key. And so my work has been more in the agri-tech, and we are seeing that in order to bring various stakeholders to play together, we need to increase the trust and facilitate the transaction between them. We did a project in Haiti where we saw that the agricultural producers were poorly paid. They don't get compensated. They usually get about 2%, and I would say even less than 2% when we look at the retail price. So as I mentioned, Haiti, we were looking at where about 25 million is exported and 1.2 billion of food is imported. Food security is a huge problem, and it has been worsening because of political instability and because the currency obviously cannot work there. So in the use of time, really, there are so many great applications going in terms of blockchain. So some of you might have heard of Civic, which is really around the decentralized identity management. Reddit, there is a liking to Reddit, which is called Steam. AgriLedger, which was done in the UK, started in the UK with a fantastic female CEO, and also obviously things like XRP. And Proppy has actually gone to where now they are issuing NFT for the real estate registry. Just wanted to give you a quick overview, and thank you so much for your time. Should you have any question, please free to ask.
Well, thank you very much for that, Genevieve. It's a complicated subject, but I think if we understand it simply as peer-to-peer decentralized transactions, I think that helps us a lot. It's very interesting how you've used it within the agricultural environment to ensure that we know exactly where to trace, exactly where things are being produced and then how they travel, using blockchain all the way. So that's really helpful as well. So I'm now going to ask Gina just to give us, again, a whip around the gaming industry. She's heavily involved with developing games, and has done a lot of work within the gaming industry for some time. So Gina, over to you. And then I'm going to go into a Q&A. If audience, you do have questions you'd like to ask, either put your hands up, since there's quite a lot of you, which is great, or pop them into the chat and we'll try and cover them. And I've got some questions for the panel as well. So I think we'll end up with quite a busy session at the end. So over to you, Gina. Thank you very much.
Great. Hopefully everyone can show my screen. Cool. Wrapping things up with a whistle-stop tour of what gaming looks like in the metaverse. I've tried to be as succinct as possible, but it is a really exciting space with lots going on. So yeah, but before we kind of get started in the metaverse, I think it's really important to take a step back and just provide some context as to why gaming is so integral to the metaverse. As you can see here, the games industry has had a pretty spectacular glow up over the past decade, now double the size of the music and film industry combined, and at the end of last year was valued at 180 billion and is expected to almost double in the next few years, which is, yeah, nothing to sniff at really. And as we take a more detailed look, I really love this infographic, but it's really interesting to see where most of these games are being played now. And with the evolution of technology, we're now seeing that the market is engaging with games more on mobile devices, which is really interesting as we explore this metaverse gaming space. Cool. Anyway, so we've established that gaming is successful, a lot of money floating around now. With the evolution of technology, the biggest market in games is mobile devices, but what does the metaverse mean to gaming? So at Talewind, we've established that the 4 pillars of metaverse gaming are social. Games and experiences in this space must be social to their core, able to be enjoyed with friends, family, community members, and drive new opportunities to form social bonds and build networks. User-generated content. Most metaverse platforms currently rely heavily on players generating content for their platforms so that other players can enjoy and go on to create, thus creating this amazing ecosystem of players becoming creators. However, we are starting to see now a new opportunity for professional and more organized content creators, aka Talewind, to fill this gap and create deeper, more meaningful, engaging experiences. Community-driven. The beauty of these social experiences is being able to find those communities that share your passions and skills and hobbies. And we're finding more and more of these experiences and games have a thriving community supporting them, using platforms like Discord and Twitter to gather and connect. Community size, engagement, and sentiment are now becoming a really important metric for the success of games and experiences in this space. And most importantly, accessibility. I'll keep hitting this home, but as we strive for a truly connected digital space, then accessibility is the key that unlocks that. We know that more than half the players use these devices, so if the space is to cater and engage wider demographics, then it must be playable across multiple platforms. But what does the current state of play look like? Whilst the common misconception, I mean, Ready Player One's been mentioned several times, but the common misconception of gaming in the metaverse is people tend to think Ready Player One. You don your headset, you jump in your rig, I mean, who's got a rig, but and transport yourself to one digital world where everything is connected. But it doesn't look like that right now, and it's unlikely to look like that for the foreseeable future. And I tend to be more inclined to use the metaverse and call it metaverse platforms instead. And it's actually pretty exciting. The gaming in the metaverse is already here and it's thriving. We've got, and this ecosystem diagram just shows how people are creating some amazing things and building this metaverse for gaming. We've got platforms where these games and experiences are being played. We have innovative tools and tech that enhance the player experiences, like spatial audio and avatar customization. We've got crypto and blockchain technology, which are paving the path for true ownership and play to earn, and as well as the infrastructure that is trailblazing new ways to engage with each other online. But gaming as it stands in the metaverse relies heavily on existing metaverse platforms. and which are boasting some really incredible figures. And I think this quote from the VP of Roblox really captures kind of the essence of what metaverse gaming looks like. So she says a lot of players are actually getting on and playing with their real world friends. I think they think the days of, hey, let's hang out with the park are over. The park is now Roblox or these other platforms. And if we take Roblox as an example, I'm pretty biased here because that's where we're building, but it's a great platform. They IPO'd at the beginning of last year a whopping 42 billion, and they boast incredible numbers. They've got 64 million daily active users, and it's arguably the leader in the gaming metaverse space. And it's been around for over a decade now. So it's not new, but it's there and it's growing. And then this is where Talewind fit in. So now we are taking advantage of these platforms, these players that are there, these incredible experiences and the tools. And we have built a hybrid team of industry veterans and native metaverse platform talent. And we're now creating content for these players, and we're leveling up the experiences that are currently there. And we are making a really successful business out of it. But we're not alone. And there are more studios like this cropping up every month, and they're filling that gap in the market, and they're leveling up the existing content, creating new games and experiences, collaborating with this innovative tech and tools, and providing world-class gaming experiences that compete with those traditionally found on console or PC. And another aspect to this is what we're finding super interesting now is that gaming traditionally has had a really high barrier to entry, and that's kind of led to kind of lack of diversity in teams. And what we're seeing now is that where metaverse platforms, gaming platforms are so accessible in this amazing ecosystem where players are becoming developers and content creators, they're now growing up on these platforms and they're bypassing formal education. They're going straight into viable and meaningful careers. I mean, we've hired 3 that were going to go to university, but they're talented Roblox developers, and they're now using that as their career instead. So what does the future look like for gaming in the metaverse? I mean, it's happening sooner than we think. 2022 has seen a record-breaking acquisitions totaling 85 billion in the first month. That was just January, and that matched the whole total for the whole of 2021. And this is important because as companies and IPs consolidate, we can make a pretty confident prediction that the concept of the metaverse will be one of these key motivators, as players will be able to experience multiple game franchises without having to leave the platform. As well as mainstream adoption. I mean, we've been in the space for 2 years, but it's now becoming, we can see all these great brands entering. We're seeing notable brands, celebrities, companies, and figureheads all planting their flag here as they cross and reinvent their ways in which they engage with their consumers and enter more interactive platforms to engage with their customers, like creating avatar clothing or games, or like Snoop Dogg created his own NFTs, and it's really exciting space. And to wrap it all up in a big expensive bow, Bloomberg predicts that the metaverse will be worth a whopping 800 billion by 2024. And in that time, I'm predicting that we're going to see even more acquisitions as big players buy their way into the space. Turbulent adoption of blockchain into gaming, it's a bit hit and miss at the moment, because but I believe that blockchain and crypto are going to pave the way for a truly open metaverse as we continue to explore the play to earn space and true ownership. And as this grows into a more accessible space, gaming becomes a regular part of everyone's lives. So yeah, that's my whistle-stop tour of gaming in the metaverse. I'm Gina, and yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Gina, that was great as well. I mean, it's the thing that I find fascinating about the gaming world is how it's expanding so much now into the other parts of the metaverse. So, the idea that Gucci might be interested in gaming, if you told anybody that 2 or 3 years ago, they'd have thought you were, just off your trolley, really.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's become really hip to buy yourself a pair of $30,000 trainers that you can put onto your avatar, and neither the avatar nor the trainers actually exist. However, you do have to pay for them, probably in Bitcoin. So that thing I think is amazing. The other thing that I think is amazing is the way that those audiences are now being drawn into other things. That is one hell of a set of eyeballs, and therefore advertising, Gucci being a good example, and everything else to do with that is really going to become where so much of this is going. We've got already some questions from the floor. Okay, Teresa, I think you can put your take your mute off if you want to. So if we can have the panelists back. We've got one question from the floor, which I think we shall start with, but I don't want to spend the whole time on this. There are lots and lots of other questions, and we've got about 20 minutes for questions now. So the question from the floor, which was actually one of my questions as well, is around the issues of safety within the metaverse: sexual harassment, safety for children. And we've seen very recently Facebook talking about having 2-meter distances between avatars, which I thought sort of felt COVID-like to me, but obviously there is an issue here. So I'd really like to just sort of get a feel from each of you as to whether you see this as an issue. Gina, start with you, because I think the gaming world, I don't think has seen too much of this yet, and yet you thought it might have done. But where do you see the whole issue of sexual harassment? Do you see it coming up? Is it going to be a big problem for the gaming industry?
I mean, it's a problem for the current gaming industry, so it's definitely, I can't see it unfortunately waving a magical wand and changing anytime soon. But what is promising is, as we're reducing these barriers to entry and communities are gathering, and communities are really protective over the safety of their communities, and they're holding people to account. And I think it's just that whole kind of decentralized ownership of those communities is where we're going to really see hopefully the change. But ultimately it's up to, and platforms are willing to listen and take getting distracted by the recording thing. But yeah, it's I don't have an answer to it. It is definitely an issue. It's just whether or not to build a truly safe metaverse, platform owners have to engage with their communities and listen.
Yes, it does seem to me that we've seen within social media that the platforms are not that responsible and take quite a lot of pushing to think about the safety stuff, and all the things that are going through Parliament at the moment to do with the digital bill. Some of that is about the access to sites through social media. So I wonder whether they will. Do you think there are, Emily, on the interactive stuff, how do you see it working there? And these haptic gloves, they can touch people. I mean, is that what we want? What social norms, what behaviors can we try and instill in people? This is all happening so fast.
It is, and I think Gina's exactly right. I mean, I've kind of been in this space now since 2016, when I started my journey into immersive and virtual worlds in San Francisco, so working for a startup in San Francisco. And at that time, it was early days for things like Altspace, and it was really bad. It was, you heard multiple stories of people being in virtual situations where they felt unprotected, and the intriguing thing is that the emotional response to that is exactly the same as though you had been harassed in a physical world. Yes. So I think a lot of the learnings are going to have to come from what we're already learning, kind of 15 years ahead with social media, and the fact that we know that the answer is not to have an anonymous presence within these worlds, because as soon as we do that in any scenario, whether it's the comments section in our local newspaper or the metaverse, then people's kind of morals and social norms go out the window. So I think there has to be a lot, the bit that I talked about in terms of the audience experience and audience journey is the area that needs to be really defined, and I think with a lot of government intervention, because it's that kind of, what are your jumping off points when you're in the metaverse? How can you put your hand up for help? How can you immediately bar someone from a room? And as you say, how does that alert it back to any sort of authority to do something about it? So yeah, I think we're miles off, very sadly, at the moment. But I do think, you know, between the kind of gaming platforms that are already existing and therefore making headway, as well as the attention and spotlight that's already been put on companies like Facebook, Meta, it's at least kind of really pushing things in a direction, maybe not quite the right direction yet, but certainly a direction.
That's interesting. And one of the things that struck me while I was looking at all of this was that at the moment to go into, for example, the Facebook space, you go in as an avatar, and I really can't see, I think that disguises who you are, what you are, disguises all the normal interactions that we've grown up with, that we spent time growing up with, we've tested, we know how these things work. And I just wonder, why do we have to be avatars in this digital space, in this metaverse? And it is, well, just give me some feel for why we have to be an avatar. I don't want to be an avatar.
I'm sure there's some other people have got thoughts on this. I know one of the immediate technical reasons for it at the moment is the fact that it's very expensive to try and capture yourself in a 3D form. So to do that, it takes either kind of what's called volumetric technology or some kind of photogrammetry. Very expensive, not at all available to the average person. So by using avatars, it's that obviously kind of sense of being able to get into this other world with a character that you can design to look like yourself, or of course not,
or not.
Like yourself. Yeah,
exactly
what
it doesn't even have to be the same sex as you.
Yeah, or same species. You can have pick an animal or whatever else.
Exactly. So I find that very, very unsettling, I think is probably the best way to put it. Fine, I think that there are lots of other questions coming through. I'm never going to be able to get through all of these. We have one question which we haven't talked about at all, and it may be that there's nobody on the panel who can help with this, but let's try it, which is that Jodie is looking for a quick overview of decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, in this space. And I've heard talk of these, but we haven't really mentioned them. And I don't know whether anybody feels confident to talk about those. Genevieve, go ahead.
Sure, I can go ahead. And the first DAO was a failure, but that's also the same as even with the NFT. The first was the failure on Ethereum. So it's the idea of pooling a number of people to pool both resources in terms of money, or you can have DAOs to create ideas. So idea creation is something that is becoming very possible with DAO. So if you imagine a number of universities and businesses working together and being able to use, not only record what their wishes are, but also to be able to vote on the direction that the group will go. One of the latest DAO that came out a few weeks ago was the DAO that tried to buy a copy of the US Constitution. However, that also gave you one of the fallacies of a DAO, which is everybody talks. So they actually published what the price was that they wanted to buy it at, and someone came in and bought it a few dollars more than they did. So it is probably how it's a way for community, which are disparate, to be able to use that peer-to-peer voting mechanism to make decision. So it's a new voting mechanism, and it records what you have said. I hope that was helpful.
I'm sure that was helpful, yes. Has anybody got any other observations on that one before I pass on? No, fine. I wanted to ask Teresa a little bit about, we talked a little bit about brands, particularly at the end with the gaming piece. But it seems to me that the way that NFTs are being used, and the descriptions that you gave of some of the way people are using the NFTs to raise money, to develop and so on, is also going to be a way for some of the major brands to get involved in this. And I'm just wondering whether it's actually major brands and advertising that is pushing a lot of what we're seeing. or whether actually there are other drivers behind the development of the metaverse as we see it.
Yep.
Teresa, if you'd like to start that one, I think other people might have other things to say as well.
I think brands, you know, when social media first came out, brands made a huge mistake that they ignored it for a long time, and they thought it was for 13-year-olds or whoever just to take pictures. And they've now learned from their mistake. And we're seeing brands come into NFTs and Web3 at a much faster rate because that is where the customer is. And from what I've seen, some brands have been able to do it right. I would give Adidas as an example of a brand that came into the NFT space, partnered with the leading communities and let them sort of guide Adidas how they should approach the community, how they should release their NFT. And now Adidas are going down their own path and they're going to have to sort of walk by themselves. Other brands have come into the space and we're seeing it as just as a way to push product, that they just want to be able to sell more product and they're going to call it an NFT. And because we're so early, there's a lot of demand, because at the end of the day, these brands still carry equity into Web3, into NFTs. But as people start to understand NFTs more, they'll just say, well, it's just a brand pushing product, and they're not like people are not going to buy it because they will just see what brands are trying to do. So brands need to understand what value they bring into the space above and beyond product. And they will make mistakes, and that is fine because all of us are navigating this new space, but they need to really understand how to have an authentic voice, because if they don't, customers won't buy their NFTs.
That's really interesting. And in the gaming space, Gina, are you seeing brands trying to muscle in on that too?
Absolutely, yeah. And echoing Teresa, like some fail. Players are super wise. Like they're there to play games and to enjoy the experiences. They're not there to be sold to. So the brands that understand the spaces and the motivations of the players on the platforms do better than those who are clearly just putting up a shop for people to buy items. But what is interesting was when Gucci entered the Roblox space originally, Roblox players pride themselves on their avatars. They collect all their items, they put them on their avatars as a display, and the Gucci experience removed their avatar and made them a mannequin, made them a Gucci mannequin, which was originally uproar. And then Gucci then tapped into the limited item space, which is a massive market on Roblox, and suddenly it turned from this massive no, we're not going into this experience, to ooh, if I can get this Gucci handbag, it's going to be worth more. So there's definitely, like echoing Teresa, you can make mistakes quickly and you can learn from them too. That's kind of what's really great about this space.
I think that leads me on to another area which I think is really interesting, that was touched upon by several of you, which is what seems to be becoming a competition between the big IT players, you know, the Microsofts and to some extent the Metas, if you call them an IT player of this world, and the gaming players, the Roblox and the Fortnites and so on. And I'd be interested to find out whether you feel that there is this tension, competition, and if it is, who's going to win? And is this going to become just another Microsoft Teams environment that happens to be in virtual reality, or is it indeed that we're all going to feel as if we put our headsets on and we're in Fortnite all the time? Just give me a feel for what you see as the competition and the way it's going. I don't know who'd like to start on that one. Emily, have a go at that one for me.
All right, yeah, I mean, it's a really hard on that. I mean, at the moment, and Gina, it'd be great to hear your opinion. It feels like both gaming, the gaming ecosystem, and then equally those that are responsible for the software that helps create those games, such as Unity and Epic Games, are the real winners at the moment. That's kind of my gut feeling, that you're noticing, they're already incredibly rich, particularly Epic. You're noticing both Epic and Unity suck up a whole collection of other tooling systems that are relevant for this, as well as even some of the content studios. And then, of course, you've got the likes of Roblox that equally are just ridiculously wealthy. It therefore already, to me, feels like the kind of older, more traditional players in that computing sector are playing, they're playing catch up slightly. And, you know, it's arguable because someone like NVIDIA are instrumental to powering the computers around the world. But they are also nothing very shiny or obvious to the consumer when they're just there, you know, as a background player. So I think we'll see it in waves. I think we're going to see that kind of gaming leap forward first, and a lot of that kind of content production tooling space move first. And then that slowly will have the trickle down effect to all of the compute tools, and then obviously the networks, etc. themselves. But yeah, very, very hard one to comment on. And I think, Gina, did you have a slide that showed some of the applications? That was really nice.
Yeah, there's like obviously some really big players, and there's obviously a lot of money floating around. But it feels like they've got the lead, but they're just buying their way in at this point, and making some other people that have spotted an opportunity very rich, which is kind of nice to see. Some other people that are spotting. We've seen some of my friends who've built tech who've spotted an opportunity in this space. It's like, I can solve that problem, and then they've been acquired. So yes, people are hoovering up some of this stuff, but I honestly think that if you're creating a platform, you can't then create content for your platform, because I think the beauty of this space is the user generated content, is the communities creating things, and this kind of almost like decentralized kind of content creation. And I think I think it would be a big mistake, for example, if Meta were to then make content for their own platform and kind of compete with that, because then it almost ruins and disturbs the heart of what is happening right now. But yeah, I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on it. It does feel like there are winners, but I don't it doesn't feel, when working in it doesn't feel like that.
Genevieve, Teresa, yes, Teresa, tell me what your thoughts are on this one.
I think in the short term, the sort of Web 2 favorites are going to win in the short term, mainly because they have the deep resources, the deep capital, and the ability to attract the talent to sort of start the race very, very strong. And when you have sort of not infinite resources, but intense resources, you can go a long time. You can take that journey, and most importantly, on that journey you can take losses that others cannot afford to take. However, in the long term, I think it will be the open source companies that will win, just because it's the different, you know, if you look at why can a 3-person team in Japan compete against Google, it's because it's open source, because they can go to an open source library of code and add their code on top of that code, which is proven to be the right code, and build and build and build and build. This is how Google got started, in a way. You know, you can just build on top of existing code. And that has larger network effects than a walled garden. That's why I think in the long term, the Animoca Brands, Sandbox, Decentraland, that's why they'll win.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much for that. I'm conscious of the time, and I'd like to finish with one question for which I'd like each of you just to give us a brief answer, and that is the very general question of what actually really interests and excites you about the metaverse, whatever that means to you. Start with Genevieve on that.
Sure, thank you very much. For me, I think that we have been living in a metaverse in some ways, and that is why the last 2 years I've actually made it clear that you could connect with people without having to be there physically. I always remember the movie Avatar, which I think was about 10 years ago, where this person in a wheelchair was able to go into another world and do things. Now, instead of just doing things because it's a dream, we now have possibility of actually getting there and interacting with others very far away from us and creating those relationships. So that's really what excites me. Opportunity for individual to stay home, but still have the richness of culture, of other cultures.
Very interesting. Thank you. Teresa?
I think mine's quite idealistic, but I would like to see Web3 close the inequality gap. If it really is going to be about owning digital assets and being able to generate an income, I would like anyone in the world who has an internet connection to be able to do that, and for us to see that gap to close. That's what I'm excited about, that there's a genuine opportunity now. It's just a question of, will it happen?
Interesting. Gina?
Mine's similar to Teresa's actually, and it's something I mentioned in my presentation, is the just reducing the barrier to entry to learning skills and accessing employment. We're seeing people being employed in the metaverse, working in the metaverse, and it's just really wonderful. As someone who, when I was growing up, didn't realize I could access gaming. It never occurred to me that I could work in games, but seeing these people growing up on these platforms and learning the skills from these platforms, now building tangible careers from that really excites me.
That's really interesting. And Emily, just to finish, thank you.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm excited to see what the newest generation, the generation that are currently teenagers, do with this technology, and much in regard to what we've been talking about, the lessons that they are already learning, possibly far better than our collective generations, about how to interact in this anonymous social media led world. I'm really intrigued because I think they're going to tackle the idea of us blending our real physical lives and our digital lives in a way more balanced kind of approach than we even are giving anyone credit for at the moment. So I'm really excited to see the new leaders who are so much more aware about critical issues for the world on a whole variety of levels, looking at how they form environments that allow them to actually have a balanced and slightly healthier navigation through all of this space.
Well, I have to say that was all incredibly positive, and I'm sure that we're going to see such a lot of different things in the next few years around this, and let's hope your optimism is right. It's great. Thank you so much, panel. I know that was a really, really interesting set of views, ideas, presentations. I mean, we've only skated hardly on the surface of this massive pond. And I would encourage all of you to continue to read about it, follow what's going on, have a go if you can. Get yourself some immersive technology and have a go. I mean, I hope at some stage we'll be able to do it without having to put headsets on. I'm sure we will. We'll probably have little things on our glasses that we can just turn on, or maybe a little bit like earbuds. There'll be something we just pop on our eyes that'll be fine.